Welcome back to the Modern Day Way podcast. We've got some exciting topics to cover today. Rich, co-host, is here with me. Benjamin is out of town on a fishing trip, having a great time. I'm sure I might be a little bit jealous as he's in Canada, enjoying the scenery. But we're going to get to have a fun conversation today and talk about some really cool stuff, all the way from underwriting deals to a handful of the missions that we are on as far as our integrated companies go. So, Rich, break ground here with me a little bit?
Absolutely. So let's start with underwriting, and then we'll follow up into getting into some of these other things. So we're going to talk a little bit about the house we looked at today and how that underwriting process works whenever we're buying something that we're looking to flip.
Yeah. So, it totally is a skill level there where if you have not had a whole bunch of experience inside of rehabs, you need to be much more diligent with your due diligence as far as what these items are going to cost you from a rehab perspective. And so when we walk into a property, we can pretty much walk out of the door and tell you what it's going to cost us.
Yep.
And now if you're entering the door as far as what, your options are to do rehabs, and if you're looking to get started in this, don't just guesstimate it.
And don't use Google.
Yeah. Or ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Okay. Although I do love ChatGPT.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah. It's amazing. But so we walk into a property today, and there's a variety of different options we ultimately have as far as how we would want to rehab it. Right now, we have to decide ultimately which one of those is going to be the most profitable and which one of those is the market going to react to the best when we go to list it.
Yeah. So the one we looked at today is currently a single family home, 2-bed, 1-bath. It's got an attic space that's been quasi renovated into a living space, and it doesn't meet the height requirements for occupancy. So regardless of what we do up there, as it sits right now with the current structure, it stays a 2-1 with a medium-sized kitchen, and it's got some kind of bonus room space on the back that's failing, and we've talked about doing some things with that. So when we walk into a property like that, the first thought is, do you do a really light lift, keep it a 2-1, turn it over, do new bathrooms, new kitchens, do what you need to do on the floor, fix things like the roof, since it's an old roof and it's got some leaks, and try to sell it. And usually for what we're doing, that's probably not the right answer, right? If you're doing your very first flip, that's a phenomenal way to do it. Go into something where you don't have to replace the plumbing, don't have to replace the electrical. Usually, hopefully it's got PVC already in the plumbing, especially if it's not a super old house. And if you're just updating something someone did in the 80s and it needs a new facelift, it's an easy project that you can get your arms around, and you may not make as much, right? You may come out with 30 grand or so on the return for less than 1 year project, but it's going to be something that also has a really high floor. It's not something that you can mess up in a way where you're taking a bath and you're worried about foreclosure or trying to break even at the end. For us, we've got a little bit more experience renovating and flipping properties. So when we look at these things, we're looking at how can we maximize the value. And so on a house like today, we talked about 3 things when we walked through it. We talked about splitting it into a duplex and whether it was good for a long-term rental hold. We talked about lifting the roof and trying to make the upstairs a little bit more livable and turning it into a modest size house, something like a 3-2. And then we also talked about going full out, putting basically an entire new addition on the top level and making it something like a 4-3, 4-3.5, and really pushing the boundary and making sure that we've got the comps in the area to find that high level.
100%. Ultimately it's about how does this deal pencil?
Yep.
Okay. How can we make it the most profitable and ultimately not take a serious amount of time throughout that project as well. And so we walked out of this one, it's a 2-1, okay, which means it's really just a 1-floor house at the moment. And they've got an additional kind of attic space that they finished out. Now, that can't be code. So as far as, ceiling height requirements go. Now, how we got it to pencil is by actually popping the top off. Yep. So you take the whole top of the house off, the whole roof, everything, the trusses, anything that's attached to really the second half of that property at the moment comes off. We're going to frame out the entire second floor, and then it'll end up actually being a 5-bedroom, 3-bathroom. Because we're going to keep the 2 bedrooms on the first floor. We'll open up the living space to the kitchen, and at that point, you've got a house that's going to sell for about $450, and we'll just talk numbers here. We're not talking about the actual address in general, so we can really get into the numbers on this stuff.
Yeah.
And so if we acquire it for 140 to 150, and if we were going to do just a light renovation on it, we still have to replace plumbing, electrical. We've got to reframe quite a bit of the joists that are sagging in the basement because they were not properly installed.
Yep.
We've got to rip out a bunch of the old plaster, replace the roof, do all the windows, tuck pointing. The entire porch on the back has to come off, which is really more of a additional almost like sunroom type space that kind of just got deteriorated over time.
Yep.
But if we're just doing a light lift on those items to make it inhabitable, make it nice, and keep it at 2.1, our resale at that point is going to be between 280 and 300.
Yep.
Okay. And we're still almost $100,000 in at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we're getting it for 140 to 150 with $100,000 in, and when you add that up, right, you're at 260 plus you talk about financing costs,
real estate
broker costs and everything. I mean, you're almost breaking even there.
Real.
I mean, there's really not much upside at all.
Which is why generally, if you have to replace all the plumbing and all the electrical, you're not going to be doing a lipstick renovation,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you're putting so much into kind of the bones of the house that the stuff people are actually buying is a really minimal amount of the deal and doesn't create enough spread, which is why we talked about pushing it further. The other side that a lot of people get hung up on is they see a house and they go, well, I'm going to do a huge renovation. I'm going to put $200,000 into this. I'm going to add a story and do all these things. And that's great. But if you don't have comps in the area, and if it's the nicest house on the street by 2x and you can't sell it, then you're stuck with a $400,000 or $500,000 home that you can't offload.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So when we look at these things, we have to make sure that there's precedent or comps in the area that justify the amount of work we're going to be doing and make sure that the spread stays there. Because at the end of the day, it's not that we're trying to make more money on one project versus the next. I mean, we're all here as a business, right? If we can't keep our doors open, we can't work. But at the end of the day, if the deal can't happen, then we can't do it. So it's more of a conversation of how do you make sure the deal actually works than it is, oh, how do we find an extra $30,000 to make? Because that's really not what we're talking about.
Absolutely. And then the other piece to all that as well is when you keep your construction costs lower and you talk about MPA, so actually tax credits, and when you're doing rehabs in certain areas that have a certain level of income, you're able to get actually 35% of your construction budget back to you within about 4 to 6 months after you sell that property.
Yep.
And so if we're going to do even a $200,000 renovation on this $140,000 house, then we're all in around 340, not bringing into account the closing costs and broker fees and whatnot.
Yep.
But we're getting an additional almost 70 grand there after that's all said and done.
Yep.
And we really also we don't like lipstick renovations. We don't do lipstick renovations. If we're doing it, we're replacing all the plumbing, all the electrical, HVAC, roof. I mean, you name it, right? It's going to be new.
Yep.
And ultimately, it'll be better than new in a lot of ways because you're going to get to still have all that old framing, the old character, the stuff that they just don't build anymore.
Yep.
Yeah.
We're talking about full brick homes that were built, up to 100 years ago. They're not the way we build houses anymore. That should be an entire podcast. We can talk about the reason we build things the way we do today, and why the market drives that. But in this particular situation, if you move into a $450,000 home that's got 4 or 5 bedrooms in a premier area of St. Louis, and it's a brick home that has all new electric and plumbing, and it has all new fixtures, like that's something that's a lot more appetizing to people, even than a lot of the cookie cutter builder grade new builds that are going up in subdivisions, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it always comes back to location every single time as well. If the property's not in a prime location where people want to live, why are you investing money into it? Ultimately, I mean, it comes down to common sense. The people who I know that are the most successful in real estate, they got a lot of common sense,
yep.
Right? They realize, well, it's the comps and it's the location, and a lot of the times in St. Louis City, it even comes down to the block. Okay, I mean,
it comes down to the street.
Yeah, the block, the street. I mean, all of that, right? I mean, sometimes it's even the location on the street. And so in this case, not a huge fan of the block on this deal that we're looking at. Really not. Now, it just happens to be situated next to 2 big already rehabbed homes where actually the other one already had the top popped off, and they did something relatively similar to what we're going to do.
Yeah. So there's a direct comp right next door. One thing we do look at is we're never going into an area that is not have upside and is at the very bottom tier and trying to put in a home that's going to be really nice and elevated, even if there's a comp, because that comp may be a quarter mile away. But for a lot of people, that might as well be a different zip code, especially when we're working in urban areas like St. Louis. You know, you can cross Vandeventer or you can cross, you know, Gravois in certain places, and one side of the street is 20 or 30% higher for the exact same square footage than the other side. So comps are a part of the equation, but the street matters a lot.
Mm-hmm. I tell new agents, I tell investors, I tell everybody, once you learn how to read comps, you figured out most of the game.
Yeah.
I mean, if you truly figure out how to read comps, everything down from, okay, this is how this person rehabbed this house, these are the interior finishes they chose, and it sold for X amount higher than the other comps, well, then you probably want to do something similar to what they did.
Yeah.
And analyzing, you know, all of the potential traction they had on that. Did the price go up from the listing? Did it go down? How long did it sit on the market? Where exactly was it in comparison to the property that I'm looking at? You know, and a lot of it is not necessarily data you're going to get off of some app or some underwriting kind of software that they have available on the market right now. So much of it is actually due diligence and energy that you're spending, reviewing those comps and having somebody who can pull the right ones for you. So it's a scenario where, I mean, and anybody who's buying investment properties to rehab them, they just need to be safe on their acquisition. You make your money when you buy. And that's, you know, the end of the story every time as far as investment real estate goes. If you buy upside down, well, you're going to be upside down.
That's absolutely right. And even when you're used to doing these projects, you can make mistakes. We learn more every single time we do a project. I bought a house in Brentwood a few years ago, and we did our due diligence. We made sure that what we were going to do met, you know, things like setbacks and the expectations. And what we didn't know was the local municipality had a special overlay that took out the ability for us to add a garage because of the size of the lot. It was actually a non-conforming lot. It wouldn't be allowed to be built today. But because it was an existing house, we were able to do certain things with the home, but we were not allowed to add a garage. Well, all of the comps that existed above $500,000 had a 2-car garage. Mm-hmm. And so when we went to sell the house, we actually took like a $30,000 bath because we weren't able to build a garage, even though square foot per square foot, amenity per amenity, we were at the line we needed to be. Mm-hmm. Because we weren't a direct comp, it actually made banks and lenders really tough on the buyer side for them to be able to figure out what they were willing to pay or allowed to pay for the house.
Mm-hmm. And if that wasn't in Brentwood and it was in like St. Louis City per se, mm-hmm. and you weren't able to add a garage there, I mean, that will massively disrupt your ability to sell that home.
Yeah.
I mean, people who are buying homes in St. Louis City over 500,000, they're going to want a garage.
Yeah.
Period, point blank. They're going to be driving relatively expensive cars, and you know what the hype is around St. Louis City as far as parking on the streets, even if that hype is not necessarily true in a lot of cases.
It's perception.
It's all about perception. And so it's just part of the due diligence process, and being really, really strategic and thoughtful on the front end is going to save you a ton of money, time, and energy on the back end.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And this one gave me anxiety because I flipped a house on this block already. And I mean, this is a deal. I mean, you learn from all these different deals that you do, yep. Right? And sometimes you have killer deals where you're like, oh, wow, I've made, you know, X amount more than I thought I was going to make. This is amazing, mm-hmm. Right? And some deals you have and you're like, this popped up, and it's costing me $35,000 more than what I expected it to. Mm-hmm. And well, there's $35,000 of your profit. Plus, if those things are popping up, it's also another $10,000 of your time as far as payments are concerned, as far as offloading that goes. And then, you know, if that happens as well, and you're hitting the market at the wrong time, because if you set up your rehab to be done in 4 months and it's going to be an aggressive market at that time where you sell it, but it ends up taking you 7 months and it hits more of like the winter timeline, well, then that's also going to affect your resale.
Yep.
And so there's so many different factors really to kind of take into consideration when buying. And if you're doing this, you want to start out small. You don't want to start out with taking the top off of a house or exactly right. You want to do you don't want to do a makeup on a guinea pig either, right? You want to do a really quality renovation on a 1,000 square foot, 1,200 square foot, you know, maybe gingerbread house, and you know, all of those hot spots in St. Louis City that we know about.
Yeah.
And so if you're looking to get into it, that's really where you should start. and don't do it in a way where you look back on it and you're like, oh, if I would have spent a little bit more money just, replacing the knobby tubby, I would have, one, felt better about yourself, and then two, you would have actually created a much more quality product. I mean, that quality product is something that you should be proud of at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And it's truly a full circle conversation. Like you said, if you're starting out, you don't take on the big project with the high risk, high reward, right? A lot of people see those numbers and they get really excited about it. But those come with a lot of risk. You can miss one thing and, like you said, cost yourself $30,000 or more when you start adding up all of the nuance to what goes with that. It also means you have to have that cash available. And so if you planned a certain amount of cash to do the deal, whether that's with a bank loan or hard money, or you brought your own cash to the table to do the flip, if all of a sudden you got to write a $30,000 check you don't have, if you don't have that sitting in a savings account that doesn't deplete your family, then you have to go find that 30K somewhere. And it's amazing how much more that money costs when you need it than it did when you were putting the deal together.
And if you don't have experience, you might not get it.
Yeah.
I mean, people lend money in real estate to people who have experience.
Yep.
People who rehab properties to make money, and it's not a question mark if they're going to make that money at the end of the day. It's a scenario where being careful and strategic is going to save you so much time and energy on the back end. It really will. And making sure that you're doing things slowly, strategically, and ultimately smart.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the biggest fails we see consistently in flips with people that either just get into it or people who try to mimic what they've seen on HGTV or whatever else is they go in and they try to do things like keep as much of what's there as possible. And they're like, oh, I'll just paint the cabinets, right? Or I'll do this. When you do that, when people walk into that house, they know that it looks like somebody just threw a new coat of paint on it, right? And whether they understand it enough to explain it and, really vocalize what they do or don't like about it, or if they don't, when somebody walks into a house, if it's tight and cramped and sectioned and they just go, I don't like this house, it feels small, they may not be able to tell you why it feels small, but that same thing happens if you go in and you try to do something way too cheap and way too light, thinking, well, they're going to read this as a brand new kitchen because the cabinets all have fresh paint on them. It's like, it's really not how this works. People know the difference, especially in today's environment. If they walk in and nothing has soft close, or they can tell that the sink is, something that was put in the 90s and you left it in there. Like, don't save the $300 for the experience level that somebody is not going to feel when they come into that house.
We only do farmhouse style sinks in our rehabs. Literally, that's it. I won't have a conversation anywhere else. That's what people want. That's what they're going to get. Okay. And so, and it's also going to give me about 10 more grand on my resale as well. And that sink cost me $300.
Yeah.
And so why save the $300? You've got a product that looks great. You can put it in your arsenal of past projects that you can then give to other investors in the future who might want to fund your deals.
Yeah.
And always finish a deal if you start it. I mean, even if you're upside down in the deal, you still finish it. Okay. I mean, sometimes you don't get that home run or grand slam that you were anticipating getting. That doesn't mean that you give up and you put it on the market. You're always going to lose money in that way. At least you'll have the opportunity to make a little bit if you finish the project out the right way.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible how many deals we walk where somebody started it and didn't finish it.
It baffles me.
It's kind of shocking. Some people now, if you get in over your head and you don't do your due diligence and you run out of money, that's how you get into a spot where you have no choice but to offload it. But the people that get in and they realize they missed something like an inspection that was really important, and they drywall before they get their electric inspected, and then they're like, well, I don't want to rip out all the stuff I just put in. Well, you're selling it to someone else who knows they're going to have to rip out everything you put in. And so, all you're doing is handing them the upside of actually just going back and fixing the mistake, right? It's the same way as like you renovate the whole house, but you don't do the kitchen. It's like, guys, somebody's going to come in and be like, well, I'm going to put 80 grand into this kitchen because I have to hire a project manager and a contractor who's going to handle this, or I'm going to have to take my time and go hire all the subs and manage the project. And no matter what, if you're doing this and you have subs and you're able to do this work, you're going to be more efficient than anyone who's looking at that house and adding their own spread and potentially a full market rate cost on that renovation, especially if they're just a homeowner.
Mm-hmm. That one right there. And then also doing things the right way. Don't skirt around a corner, avoiding a permit, and then have your project held up by 3 months because the county came in or the city came in and they said, oh, you didn't pull a permit on this. Well, now you got to rip it out and start over again. And you got to open up permits the right way. If you're not working with them right to begin with, they're going to make it really difficult for you to work with them in general. And it's already relatively difficult to begin with. And so, I mean, as far as timelines are concerned, I mean, the review time on projects right now is out of this world. I mean, even scheduling an occupancy inspection in St. Louis County right now is a 2-week turnaround.
Yeah.
It's nuts.
It is. And that goes back to 2 points. One is you don't realize how small your community is until you start working with similar subs or similar contacts on these types of deals. You have the same inspector walk into the third project you're doing in whatever area, like skirting and trying to get by with things or trying to push back on stuff that you should be doing the right way is not going to help you in the long run. We've seen that many times when you work in a way that people know that you're delivering a good quality product that has a huge impact on not only your inspectors and your buyers who talk about you to other people, but even people like your subs. Like, you're going to get better quality subs because they're working with you on projects that they know you're going to deliver something well. If people feel like you deliver crap projects on the back end and that you don't stick by your word, and if somebody has an issue happen 3 months down the road and you ghost them, they're not going to want to work with you because their name's attached to that too.
I think about a rehab I sold a couple weeks ago, and brand new hot water heater. The hot water heater wasn't working. The pilot light's not coming on for whatever reason. It was going to take me 2 weeks to get that new pilot light in because it was kind of a unique heater. And I was like, oh, well, I don't want the buyer to this property. That was my rehab. My name's on that. That's my quality. I'm just going to replace the whole hot water heater. I'm going to give you a brand new hot water heater. They'll be there tomorrow. Right. It's sticking behind the product you're putting out and being proud of it and looking at things other than just revenue in some ways.
Absolutely.
I mean, money is great, but having a good reputation and having being honest and having integrity around your projects that you're doing in a lot of ways is going to make you way more money in the long run as far as time, energy, and reputation are concerned.
And that goes both ways. So working with subcontractors, contractors, different groups, material suppliers that have integrity, stand by their product. Everybody who gets into this business tries to race to the bottom, right? It's like, how do I get this cheaper? How do I put out a Facebook ad and try to find a different plumber or whatever their solution is for that? And it's unbelievable how much money you lose trying to save 5 or 10% on some of the categories of what you're doing. Work with people who stand behind the product, even if they cost a little bit more, and have integrity, and you don't have to worry about your next 4 deals that you work on with them. When you shop every single deal and you go to somebody you've never worked with, that's a whole new learning experience.
And there could be 2 sides to that coin. You know, you either get a great experience or you get a really bad experience, because just a couple of things can cause a really bad experience. And how many subs have you worked with outside of your first year of doing things that you worked with a sub who was not a referral? On your own personal deals? None.
Yeah.
So,
when you learn those, and we call it tuition, right? You pay the price of tuition one way or the other. So when you work with those people who are what we call off the street, whether that's, a Facebook group or whatever, somebody that you don't know, and you put the scope together and you think everybody's on the same page, the number of times I've seen homeowners try to do that, usually saying, oh, well, I can save the GC fee if I take this portion out of the contract, or I can save, this piece, or I'll bring my own plumber because he's $6,000 cheaper and it's my cousin's brother's uncle's best friend, whatever. With the number of deals I've seen go through that and just absolutely take a massive hit because they went that route, has to be in the 90% neighborhood.
I think it's absurd.
Yeah.
And if you're an out-of-state investor watching this, don't be. It's the place where I see people screw up the most, consistently at least, is being an out-of-state investor that doesn't have real connections.
Mm-hmm.
They might have interviewed a couple of GCs, and they might have been guaranteed a price that's going to change.
Yep.
And so making sure the people that you're working with are reliable, honest, have integrity, and actually stand behind their work is going to not only create a better product for the consumer, so the buyer in this standpoint, but it's going to make you look better, and it's going to make the process just that much more seamless.
It is. And a lot of out-of-state GCs, obviously, or out-of-state investors, obviously a lot of people who are getting into this game, you're not looking for stuff if you live in the Midwest in Arizona, right? You're not looking for that for your first flip. And if you are, don't. Like you said, that's not where you need to start. It is hard to manage projects in your own backyard. It's incredibly hard to manage projects in other states. Now, the better you get, the more consistent you are, the more relationships you build, those opportunities start to open up. We have out-of-state investors that come in and look for groups that have done really quality projects and have a consistent history of producing. And they say, okay, I want to invest in this. You know, I've got this deal. Would you guys help facilitate this? That's a conversation when you've done 50, 60 properties and you know, okay, this is the area. Tell me that this is a good area because you're from here. Tell me who you would use. When you've got relationships like that, you can do things in other places. If you were starting with, $40,000, $50,000 and getting a bank loan and going to do a flip, if you're looking for anywhere that you don't really know the area, you're probably going to pay for that.
100%. And I mean, the most experienced investors I know, we're talking about guys that have been doing this for over a decade, have flipped hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of properties, have built hundreds, if not thousands of properties. They are in a different league.
Yeah.
Okay. They're in a different league. When it comes down, this industry is so based around experience. It is so based around experience. And so you don't want to copy some guy that you saw on YouTube because he made money in Arizona, living in St. Louis, but it's going to end up biting you in the butt in a way that you're like, oh, but he did it. Why can't I?
Yeah.
Right. And it becomes almost laughable in some ways because you just said you could be an attorney, but you never went and got your, your certifications, right? Yeah. What you needed. And it's a similar concept, right? How are you going to go perform surgery if you never went to medical school?
Yeah.
It's a caveat that comes back to common sense most of the time.
It does. And there's one other asterisk that is an absolute no-go for new people getting into this stuff. And somebody is going to tell you they've done it and they've made money on it. And be really, really cautious or careful about these stories. That's starting out trying to go the Section 8 route. Right? The number of people who said, well, I can buy this house for $50,000 or $60,000 in this really dilapidated area, and I'm Section 8, so it's subsidized. To say that you have no idea what you're getting into is an understatement. Not only the actual requirements that go into that and understanding Section 8, but the amount of maintenance, repair, and everything else that starts to become a factor when you end up in areas like that is absolutely huge.
And Section 8's a great investment strategy for a handful of investors.
Yeah, they know how to do it. Yeah.
And ultimately, you really want, if we're buying if it's a buy and hold property, right? I mean, there's really a few criteria that you need to be looking at. Okay, well, the cash flow is going to be number one, right? Because it needs to pencil as far as cash flow is concerned. You don't want to be losing money on that property every single month.
Right.
Your appreciation is almost always going to see a greater return at the end of the day than what that cash flow is going to see.
Yep.
And then you've got your tax benefits, right? You encompass the three of those and look at it from a 1,000-foot view and actually understand it. And I guarantee you go buy appreciating properties. Yep. That's still cash flow a little bit.
That's right. And that you said appreciation matters more than cash flow in a lot of cases. And that's absolutely true. I'm going to steal some advice from someone else that we both know.
Yeah.
So Ron was talking to us about some of the deals we're doing, and we were asking him about that conversation because he brings up cash flow and appreciation a lot. And we talked about that. And I said, hey, you've mentioned a number of times that cash flow matters more than appreciation. We actually had a really good clarification conversation around it. And the ultimate summary was it can't be negative cash flow for the sake of appreciation, right? You don't want to go in and buy a property that makes $0 or negative dollars because you say, well, this area is going to come out great, because you don't know what's going to happen. You can't predict the crashes. You can't predict how long it takes for that upswing. The market alone goes up and down outside of anything anyone is able to predict, as we've seen in the last 5 years. So going in and making sure that you're okay with the cash flow day one, and then looking at the appreciation, you have to have the cash flow as a baseline. You can't go in and say, well, this is going to cost me 80 grand a year to hold, but it's going to be worth a lot more in 2 years, unless you have the pockets to be able to do that. And you never want to do that on deal one, right?
You never want to do that on deal one. I mean, if you are that niche investor that's able to make Section 8 work, and the people that I've seen that can make Section 8 work typically manage their own properties, so the cost is very low from that perspective. They've got a couple of handymen on staff that can manage the upkeep of those properties, and really what they're doing is focusing on cash flow at that point, because their appreciation is relatively minimal in those Section 8, locations.
Absolutely.
And so they're buying it, really thinking long-term cash flow here. And so they're getting the properties for pennies on what you would spend in a super stabilized, per se, neighborhood, something where you're seeing a much higher than a median sale price throughout the rest of the locations around that specific area. And you're going to regret, ultimately, when you go to sell that property in 5 years, if you haven't managed it the right way, because you haven't made too much money throughout the course of ownership there, ultimately, as far as cash flow is concerned, to even really break you even when you go to sell it, when you talk about like even the closing costs, the broker fees, everything that's wrapped into selling that property. It's and the tax benefits aren't that great either, because you're talking about a lower value on that home.
That's true. And then when you go to sell it, you're limiting your buyer pool, because only certain people are willing to buy Section 8. So the end of day, period on the end of the sentence statement is if you're getting into it, you haven't done it before, don't get enamored by the people who are saying, oh my gosh, I bought 2 Section 8 buildings and I'm making $85,000 a year just sitting on it, and I had no money out of pocket, and it's all subsidized and guaranteed. Because it's not that can't happen. The same reason you do the lipstick renovation on the first one is, out of 10 renovation deals, one of them may go really south. But we use the 10 renovation deals to create an average that makes it worth it. If you happen to pick the renovation deal that goes really south as your first deal, that's a bad spot to be in.
It's a dangerous spot to be in. Unless you've got a lot of excess cash, or you're working with somebody who has a lot of excess cash and they're aware of the potential downside of this deal or the potential risks of this deal, and they're able to merge that gap in between what you estimated the cost is going to be and then what it actually ended up being, then you're going to be looking at your bank account and looking at yourself in the mirror and wondering, well, what did I do?
Yeah, absolutely. It's always going to be a scenario of averages when you're talking about real estate. You want your averages to come back well. And sometimes we take high risk, high reward. Sometimes we do that and average it across a few deals. And if 2 of them are home runs, it's no different than a stock portfolio, right? If you want to go put in money in the S&P 500, you're going to get your 7, 5, 8 on average across a number of years, and that's fine. And somebody's going to tell you how they made a 65% return on one stock they bought, and that's fantastic. They also had 3 other stocks that they ended up losing money on, right? Like, it all averages out. And if you're getting into real estate, it's such a stable baseline investment that you can pick the things you know will make money. You can pick the S&P 500s. You can build a little bit so that you can go decide where you're going to take those risks.
Absolutely. I mean, it all comes down to risk versus reward at the end of the day. And if you take that greater risk, sometimes the reward may be minimal or it might be great. And so if you take the steady path to, I know this is going to work because of the location. I know what my numbers are, and I know what the return is going to be, right? It's a little bit less risk and a little bit less reward, but you knew what the numbers were. And so you were safe. You're running it like a business, like how you're actually supposed to operate a business.
If if you are stepping up to the plate for the very first time and you can't afford to strike out, don't go for the grand slam. Right? Base hits.
Yeah, base hits.
Base hits win baseball.
Absolutely.
If you haven't watched Moneyball, go watch it. It's a phenomenal movie. But it also really, really speaks to business and real estate. If you have to have a win, go for the base hits. When you have enough wins that you can take some big swings, take the big swings.
Absolutely. So we've got a lot of other stuff that we actually meant to cover inside of this podcast, but I think it's getting to a point where we should maybe push it off to next week.
Okay.
I mean, we've got some super cool projects, not just projects, companies that we are facilitating.
Okay.
And I think we cover that next week.
Yeah, let's do the integrated stuff with Ben. I think that makes sense.
I agree.
All right.
Agree. All right. Well, thank you guys for tuning in, and don't go lose money on real estate.
Please.
Yeah. Be smart.